preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
This one, the February 24th and March 3rd from 11 to 12:15. And what we're going to be discussing is a little bit the nature of American society with emphasis on ethnicity. We're calling it the melting pot and so on. And that's what we'll do. And I thought to get us started, I'm going to ask you to fill something out, really to warm us up and get to know each other and so on and so forth. Don't do anything with this, just look at it, and then I'll tell you what to do.
Need a pencil?
Yeah, here, pencils.
Pencils.
Right.
You have to share.
If you need a pencil, just raise your hand, Ms. Siegel.
I think so.
Does everybody have a this?
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Now, Mrs. Siegel here is what's your how should we introduce you?
Well, you're not supposed to introduce me.
Well, Mrs. Siegel's a board member. She has something to do with these
Chairman of the
programs.
morning activities.
Right. And she's here to make sure that I earn my keep. All right. Now, here's what I'd like you to do. This is not a test. It's not an examination. I'm not interested in how much you know. I'm more interested in how you feel about things. So there's no such thing as a right or a wrong answer or a good answer. There's no such thing. There's only how you feel. And you're to answer what immediately comes to your head, even if it's silly. Like if it says, I am a, and if you think a nut, write that down. See? Now, of course, we're taught about groups in American society. So really, in a way, it's what? Now, don't write anything. So just put down the first thing that comes to your mind. Now, instantly, what I'm going to do is that after you fill these out, you'll fold them, and then I'll ask Mr. Siegel to collect them, and then we'll redistribute them at random, so you won't have your own. And then I'll ask you to read, but you'll be reading somebody else's. That way nobody will be embarrassed if it says here, I'm a nut, you see, or anything else like that. All right? You see? Now, incidentally, I was in Israel this past summer, and some of these questions were asked there, and so we'll compare ourselves with the Israelis, and we'll get an idea. So therefore, then the others different from myself are, put down who you think they are. Put down a name. What immediately comes to your mind emotionally. And don't worry whether it's a dignified name or a good name. In other words, the only criterion here is truthfulness. Then 3, the group in a city that disturbs me most is, whether this is a racial, ethnic, or occupational, or friendship, whatever it is, put that down. Because, then just a little item, whatever that may be. Then the group in a city I like most is, put it down. Because, whatever it may be. Then on question 5, here are phrases. If you're at a dinner party or a cocktail party, or you're talking with your children or with friends, and someone mentions hard hat, what immediately comes to your mind? What word or phrase or feeling, tone? Put it down. Catholic. In other words, that's associations. What do you associate with these words? Incidentally, I left one out. E, F, G. What's after G? H? Put down Jew. And then a line, and then put an association with that word. All right? Right down at the bottom. E, F, G, H, then after G, on the fireman, put down Jew with a line. All right? So now you're free associating. And it's anonymous. I repeat what I said before. And don't worry about being correct. We'll collect them and redistribute them anonymously. So now I leave you to work. Oh, yes. That's okay.
Yes, thank you.
Somebody.
Thank you so much.
You're not supposed to share information. Just be yourself. Now, when you finish, just fold it in half.
Is there an ashtray around this place?
I'm afraid there is no smoking permitted in this building.
Oh, all right, that's very fine. I
No
approve-
smoking.
I
You
approve,
have to-
that'll stop you all
you
day.
have to
if I-
control
if I
yourself.
don't do it now. No, I'm not a big smoker. Once I start for the day, then I smoke a lot.
All right, here. Pick one. The odds against it being your own.
It's my own.
I was gonna say, if it is, just keep quiet. You all handle it as if it's gonna burn. All right? You, oh, yes. All right, now let's see, who's gonna, good. All right, suppose we, start.
Exchange with you.
I hear you. This one. Who, do I have, is everybody? Well, let's, start. The first one is I am, and then we'll see if we can make sense of it. What do you have?
I am a person.
All right. Let's kind of go around the room. What do you have? And I'll write down the answers.
Instructor.
So one is a person. Whoops. Instructor. All right. You call them out as we go.
Jew.
Jew.
Jew. Oh, I'm sorry. Housewife.
Housewife.
Person.
Middle class conservative.
Okay.
Housewife.
Housewife.
Liberal.
Did you say
I said
liberal?
liberal.
Oh, you said liberal.
Housewife looking for a nice man.
Yes.
Well, I have my own.
Oh. Who else? You don't have any.
Thank you. He says,
What is
Jew.
yours? Yours says Jew. 3. What does yours say?
Mother.
Mother?
Housewife.
Housewife.
What's yours?
Housewife.
I am a white Jewish, well-educated, middle-class housewife.
How do we put that one down? Well, of course, they're all adjectives to a noun, right? So we agree? It's going to be housewife. What is yours say?
Truth seeker.
All right. Now, that's who you are. Would you read, if you could move a little to your left. All right. The others who are different from myself are, what do you have?
Housewives.
Housewife?
Plural.
These are the others. So you have housewife. All right, let's go around the room like before.
Non-Jews.
Career women. Animals.
Non-Jew.
Not people.
Radical right and left.
Radical, right, and left.
She's a
Well, just put down radical. All right.
workers. Men.
Either too far left or too far right. That's the liberal.
Yes. Who just read?
I did.
Oh, the others are perhaps very happy.
Non-Jew.
Non-Jew?
Everyone. Professionals.
What?
Hippies.
Next.
Maids.
Maids?
Says another race, religion, or more or less fortunate.
Where have I got happy? What do you have?
Says no, meaning I guess no different from myself.
All right, now what does this tell us about you as a group, not individually? Now, what this gets at when you ask a person, who are you? In American societies, you get some notion of usually group identification. because we're a culturally pluralist society, and we have Swedes and Hungarians and Italians and Jews and Catholics and whatnot. And usually, as I'll indicate, that's a key aspect of one's. But to ask it open-ended the way I did, the word open-ended means you finished a sentence. I could have given you a choice. I could have said, are you a person, you could have picked one. But this was really to get it open-ended from you. So now, 3, we have 15, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16. Now, let's say we have 20 people, so percentage-wise, 10% of the group, 15% of the group have an ethnic identification, at least marked by this examination. When you say, who are you? See? Now, let's see if we can cluster the others. Others had a political aspect. That is the word conservative and liberal. Those two would be along political lines. That seems to be key. And instructor is an occupational category. If this were a group of men, I might, all men, they might say, I'm a salesman. In other words, you have an occupational identification, you see. Now here, we'll call this a universalist answer. Now, let's see. Now, the most significant one is 8. So that's almost 50%.
Is that an occupation also?
What? Is that an occupation?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, what do you think it is? Is it an
I think it's
occupation?
an occupation.
I think it's a
a
habit
job.
carryover, because that's what you put down when you fill out any type of federal form, like a passport. So I think it's a habit carryover.
What's wrong with it?
That's
It's
what I would say.
occupation, that's how I
All
think.
right, then,
Nothing wrong with it, I
then
think
it's
it's
an
just habit.
occupation.
Yeah.
Yes.
But is
It kind of identifies you in society. People say, what do you do? You don't say, I'm unemployed. You'd say, this is one of the problems of the census, but if you decide one day, I'm going to look for a job, suddenly you're in the right, you're then counted as someone looking for work, you see, and that sometimes becomes a very technical question, you see. So it's an occupation, it's a status. What else is a housewife? Inside, would women live nowadays? Is there a problem with that? Did anybody feel embarrassed about putting down housewife?
There was always a problem with it, but there were always some people who liked it. But I think always, and there always will be, anybody who says, they're a housewife means I'm a nothing kind of identity.
Or you changed it to homemaker, you said homemaker.
Yeah, homemaker is not.
If I were to ask you to associate, if we had a lot of time, if I were to get at your emotional tone towards that word, and we had phrases like, I'm a nothing, or I'm exploited, or I work very hard, and so on, would you lean in that direction as a housewife?
No,
No?
I'm well paid, I have a good job,
Well rewarded?
yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
How would the whole group feel? In our society, is a housewife status well paid, well rewarded, well respected?
Depends upon
Depends on
the
what
socio-
yeah,
That's
what
what
place-
we're dealing
what
with.
economic
Depends
place.
on your class status.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Yes, so some housewives could be greatly exploited. All right, so now, this gets at, I'm going to describe some notions in sociology. You see, we define ourselves as society defines us, partly. And therefore, this notion of the looking glass self is this is a phrase that a sociologist named Cooley used many years ago. And we respond to others the way we think they are responding to us. In other words, it's like looking in the looking glass, and therefore you see what's in the other person's eyes, you see. And as these definitions change, we kind of internalize these definitions, and we become what we are defined to be. This isn't as simple as it sounds. Let us say some of you have teenage sons. Anybody here? Teenage? All right. Daughters? Now let's say your teenage daughter or son and a friend, your uncle comes to the house with a car and he leaves the keys in the ignition and they go for a joyride without asking anybody. And you get very upset because they don't have a license and the police come and so on and so forth. Now if you live in Westchester, the cop will come to the house and say, you shouldn't have done that. You could have hurt somebody, and he'd admonish you and so on and so forth. If a black kid in Harlem does that, he's arrested, and then he goes through a process of what you might call identification. That is, the cop handles him as if he were a delinquent, a car stealer, when really his image was that I'm just going out for a joyride. And suddenly my car was stolen some time ago, and the police did find it. They said some kids took it, they kept driving it till the gas ran out, and they dropped it. But they weren't stealing it. Now, what's stealing it? They took it without permission. You know, it gets awfully complicated. Now, when the teenager who's black or poor or Puerto Rican, you know, goes through that process of being arrested, of being mugged, of going to standing for a prisoner, the detective talks to him in a certain way and begins to act towards him as if he were a delinquent, full-fledged, the kid soon becomes what he is defined, although he started out as a kid on a joyful lark. So therefore, ethnicity, that is, whether you come from middle-class background or whether you live in Scarsdale or in Harlem or in Bedford-Stuy, whether you're black or white, Jewish or not, defines the definition of society and then how you come to identify yourself. I give you a vivid example of what that is. You see. So now your identification has then to do with occupation and family rather than ethnicity. That is, very few of you said you're Jews. 3. And I'd say there's nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying this is the way we are. And so you might ask me, how did you answer? If you would ask me, do you want to ask me?
Yeah.
I said father, because at that moment I had small kids, and I then was interested. That was the first word that popped out of my mind, and I said, well, why did I say that? And it made me think, because evidently that status at that moment in time had a lot of meaning to me. It was new, and incidentally, in 9 months I'll say grandfather. So that'll be a whole new experience. Because I'm not used to that, and that's not my self-image. I don't like that. I'm going to fight that one, In fact, when my son told me his wife was pregnant, I couldn't imagine how she became pregnant, Because I still think of him as a little boy, and yet he's not, He's 26. All right, so that's, now, what aren't you? Now, you know what I'm amazed wasn't here? When we took this in Israel, the most usual responsible, the others are, inside the Israelis, the word was goyim. And none of you put that down. Is it that did you censor yourself? Or it did occur to you? No, but I mean that word. You don't think that word. That's all right. No? Or Gentile. So 4 of you put down non-Jews. Inside, it's consistent with this, isn't it? That there are few, there were 3 who said Jews, and therefore the others. Now, you could have said Gentiles, you could have said Christians, you could have said Goyim, but you didn't. You just said non-Jews. So it's a kind of a bland response. Now, let's see. It's interesting that here we had a cluster of housewives, 8, so it leans in a certain direction. But here it's scattered all over the lot. Look, professionals, hippies, housewives, non-Jews is the only one that was more than 1. Radicals is 2, workers, men, and so on. Isn't that interesting that what's different from yourself is so widely scattered? It's not an obvious difference, you see. There's an article in today's Times by someone I don't particularly admire, a fellow named Rubenstein, who used to be a Hillel director in Pittsburgh. He's now teaching in Florida, and he talks about the rift in Israel. I don't think he knows too much what he's talking about, but it is an issue, and he says American youth are disoriented, disenchanted with Israel, and he quotes an Israeli kid who said, when you talk about the draft with me, a friend of mine, Dr. Urbans, we all went to school together, works for the American Jewish Committee in Israel, and they have teenage children like we do, and the attitude towards the draft is so different, because I said to this American, but they're living there now and subject to the draft, will your kid go into the army? And she looked at me as if to say, she says, the whole class goes into the army as a class. It's not an individual matter, unless, the kid is crippled. But everybody goes in, and she couldn't dream of his not going in. Whereas here, we work might and main to stay out, those who are supposed to the war in Vietnam and so on, you see. Now, that kid strongly feels Jewish and Israeli. And if you ask him, who are you, it would strongly, because their social conditions are different in Israel than they are here. All right, let's see, what else did you say? Do you want to ask any questions about what we've said so far? About identification?
Is Goyim a derogatory word?
Is what?
Is Goyim a derogatory
Goyim? Is that a derogatory term?
It is.
Yes,
If
of
I
course
were
it is.
not Jewish, I would feel it was a derogatory term.
Yeah.
No, just a minute, but you are Jewish. So
But you
we'll take a
have to,
vote. How many think the word
reject.
goyim is a derogatory term? 1, 2,
I
3,
do.
4, 5, 6, 7, 8. How many think it's not a derogatory term? It's a bland term. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
How else would you
8 to
say
7.
it in Yiddish?
A non-Jew.
Why say it in Jewish?
Well, let me ask you, why not say it
I
in
think
Yiddish?
there is another
If that's
way
the
of
way you
saying
think.
it. There must be another way of saying
I
it.
think it's,
Right.
I've always heard it.
Just plain Gentile.
derogatory.
The
All
people
right.
who speak Yiddish would say Goyim as a non-Jew.
That's
They
right.
say, an American, an English-speaking person would say
All right.
non-Jew. But it takes
It has a flavor of a derogatory expression because of the East European background that it comes from. That quite often, are many of you children of immigrants? I would assume so.
Oh, sure.
All right. Well, now, the only Christians my mother met were drunks. And it took me a long time to convince my mother that Gentiles were not drunks. But that was counter her. She grew up in a small town in Poland, and when the peasants got paid, or when they came into town at certain times, she said they hid. So almost the word goy and drunk were almost synonyms for each other. It wasn't until she came to the United States that her horizons broadened. Incidentally, I have a famous story. I taught my mother how to read and write English when I was 12. And I thought all children taught their parents to read and write English because most of the people I knew who had gray hair were grandparents spoke only Yiddish because I was born in Coney Island. And my mother went to school at night and she had her books and I wasn't self-conscious about it at all. And we went into the kitchen and everything. And I used to use the Daily News as a supplementary primer. And she came across the word UP and she pronounced it Yoop. And I said, it's up. She said, then why don't they spell it OP? And I said, Mom, the Americans decided it should be UP and you can't argue with them. She said, all right. And then we came across the word border, B-O-R-D-E-R. And we had somebody living with us that time who was a border. Oh, she said, that's like Abe who lives with us. I said, no, that's like a border around the rug. She said, well, how is it that they sound the same? And I said, Mom, the Americans decided they should sound the same, and there's nothing we can do about it. We have to adjust to it. And she said to me in Yiddish, das ist eine sehr moderne Sprache. You know, this is a very peculiar language that the border around the rug and Abe sound the same. And I said, put it that way, it does sound peculiar. And then she thought for a moment. She said, when I crossed over from the Polish-Russian border, is that also the same word? And I said, yes. Though it's spelled differently, she was really amazed. We now come to the punchline. We looked at a picture in the Daily News. It was a picture of a train wreck. A train wreck, an accident. And she became very upset. And she said, were there any Jews in this wreck? And I said, Mom, in the United States, you never ask questions like that. Because they're human beings. They're mothers, they're fathers, they're children. And we don't ask things like that. And I said critically to her, now I'm a little embarrassed by it. I said, maybe where you come from, because I was disassociating myself from her in my ignorance. I said, you ask questions like that, but in America you do not, you see. And she looked at me because she was very fond of me. And she said, well, maybe you're right, she said in Yiddish, but she said, I think the Jewish people have enough trouble without also being killed in train wrecks. Now that's a Shalom Aleichem tale, you see, and you can't understand why she said that or why I said what I did, because our life experiences are so different. All right, so let's, so Goyim does have a little bit of a flavor. And I remember as a child singing songs, you know, Shikar is a, Bala is a Goy. You know. It took me a long time to get over that.
My grandmother's house, the real meaning seemed to be uncultured and uneducated. It was a
That's
lower class, as I recall.
That's right, yes, right. All right, now let's see, what's the group in a city that disturbs me most? What, do you have any? Oh, you don't have a sheet. Oh, well, excuse me. What is yours?
That's addicts.
Addicts? All right, let's go around the room like before.
Addicts also, dope addicts.
All right, that's 2.
Negroes.
Negroes?
Dogs.
Negroes.
Oh, I pass.
All right.
says color. Jet set.
Who? The group that disturbs me most.
The what?
Three.
3.
Yeah.
What does it say?
Oh. The
Let's hear about
arrogant,
Gillen.
the arrogant and the snooty and the unfriendly.
All right? Next.
The blacks, because of their hostility towards most whites and Jews in particular.
All right?
Reactionary group, hard hats, that's what's not in touch with the time. Pro-war groups.
Books.
Colors.
Color?
Black Panthers.
The youth, because they're not being heard.
Black.
All right, so now it looks like we're coming into something, isn't it? That what bothers us now are what you might call the deviants of society. One, because they're addicts, and therefore they engage in crime and all kind of problem. And then Negroes. Now, let's see why. What's put down there for why? Of those who did say black, those 8, what does it say?
Because they do very little to improve themselves.
All right, what's
Because of their antagonism.
attack? Yes.
Because welfare they feel is their right.
All right. Who else?
I've got
Who else had a
one
black?
show here. The dope addict I have.
No, I just want the blacks.
Oh,
I
that's
have
it.
one,
Yes.
violence,
Violence?
because they frighten me.
All right.
Or hostility towards whites and Jews in particular.
They're Jewish, all right? Okay, let's take the addicts. The 4 of you who had addicts, what was the reason given why you disliked them?
Danger to young and crime.
All right?
Because of their antagonism.
It doesn't say to
Oh,
whom.
addicts, you said?
Yes,
No, I
addicts.
don't have
Oh,
that.
no, who has addict?
Danger to me and my children.
Then they are destroying our society. I go along with that.
Is that
I didn't ask you what you went along with. I want to know what's on your paper.
She doesn't have that.
Oh, you don't have that? Okay, all right. All right. Well, all right, so now we've made ourselves a little agenda. Let's just get a feel of hard hat. What do you have next to that? Hard hat.
They're against progress.
Anti-intellectual.
Anti-intellectual.
I have reaction.
Far right.
Reactionary.
Laborer?
Reactionary.
Reaction.
Against progress. America first.
American First.
Bigots.
Bigots.
Joe.
Joe, that the movie? Yes.
Right and fascist.
Right and fascist.
I have reactionary group, not in touch with your time. Reactionaries.
Reaction. All right, I'm interested, just for the sake, I'll collect these, I'll make a summary for you. What do you have for E, for black mayor?
Newark.
Why not?
Newark.
Okay, why not? Newark?
Okay.
Newark.
To come.
Newark.
What do you have?
To come.
To come? In New York, yes. What else?
Impossible.
Impossible? Is that what you have?
That's what it says.
Okay,
Good if he's capable.
good if he's capable.
Why?
Why, W-H-Y?
Unnecessary.
Unnecessary. All right, What
Same
other-
as white.
same as one. Okay, all right, now, why did I ask you to do this? To sensitize you to the fact that American society is a society of groups and not just a society of individuals. That's the first key fundamental fact that I want to make. And that it's your group membership that often influences or determines your status in life, your access to the good things in life, your access to the mainstream of society, and also how you are defined by society. Independent often of individual characteristics. Now, incidentally, this gets into what we call stereotypes. If a person thinks that a Catholic is, or a Gentile is, let's say ignorant, and then he meets somebody who's not, it takes him quite a bit of time to adjust his thinking mechanism to see that. See? But the first point I want to get across to you is that for those of you who put down, now it's only two who just put down, I'm a person. In other groups, we would have had a larger percentage. You see, and maybe minority group people tend not to be that universalistic because they're more aware of the meaning of group membership. I want to tell you a story that illustrates this basic fundamental point I'm starting with. My field of interest is race relations. And some 15, 18 years ago, I worked at Cornell University on a project. And I was hired, and as part of the hiring process, I was interviewed by the dean at Cornell University, who wanted to see whether I was qualified. And he first asked me, where did you go to school, and what did you write, and what are your degrees, you know, the usual thing and so on. And then he said to me, you know, this is going to be a project dealing with blacks and Puerto Ricans and Mexicans and so on. And he said, I wonder whether you can handle it. And I looked and wondered. And then he continued, he says, because you're Jewish. Now, no dean had ever spoken to me so frankly before, and I really didn't know what he was getting at. And I didn't know whether to become angry. You know, was he being anti-Semitic? But I knew him, I respect him. I didn't think he was. And I wondered, what was he getting at? Well, for lack of what you might call a structured response, I said, what do you mean by that? He said, my impression of most Jewish sociologists is that they really can't understand and appreciate others who are different from themselves. Well, I hadn't made any study of Jewish sociologists. I didn't know, so I just shrugged, you know. See? And then he said, his punchline was, how can you understand others when you have Jewish eyes? Suppose somebody had said that to you, what would you have said?
He was a bigot. He was
No,
very
sir.
prejudiced.
Bigot?
I think he's
Would
right.
you? You think he's right?
Yes.
Now here we have two polarized responses. How many agree with Mrs. What's your name? Fleischer. That he's a bigot? Only one. How many agree he's right? Now incidentally, there might be more than one choice here. Why do you say he's right?
I think that this is the tendency today, and especially our generation who was going through the Hitler years. I think the younger people today, this is not so. But I think for us...
I mean, our age.
Well, our age. I have children 23, you have 26, so
Yes.
we can't be too far apart, right?
That's what I meant.
Doesn't mean you're the
That's what I
same
meant
age.
there,
But,
yes.
no, I'm terribly young.
You think then that members of minority groups have difficulty understanding people who are members
yes,
of other
I think
groups?
they're very inward. I think that they suffer from this.
I'm surprised that as a professional, he had such an unprofessional response. You were
Such an unprofessional
individual.
question.
Such an unprofessional question. You are a professional, and so is he. I'm surprised at his subjectivity. But I feel that she does it was very honest and absolutely so.
Well, do you?
No, I know.
What do you feel?
I feel that it was very unprofessional.
How many think he was unprofessional?
Maybe unprofessional, but honest.
But honest.
No, I didn't mean
Yes.
he wasn't unprofessional.
Now, incidentally, I want to finish the story. He said,
I think so too.
he said, he asked me that question, and I was absolutely mystified. And I had what you would call sociologically no structured response. You know, usually people say, if you live in Manhattan, how can you get here? You know, you have a ready answer to most questions in life because it's been asked before, either in your imagination or actually, but nobody ever asked me this. So therefore, I had to resort to the truth. You know, I couldn't think of anything that I thought was right, and I just had to be truthful, you see. So I said to him, well, I'm a social worker, and I've had graduate training, and hopefully, if my training took, that is, if I'm really a professional, I ought to be relate to a young person or an old person, or a person with gray hair, or anybody different from myself, like a doctor or an attorney, objectively. And that if I can't, to that extent, I'm unprofessional, you see, and so on. So he looked at me. He was much older than I was, and this is the thing. He says, all right. He said, you're hired. And I left quite shaken by it. I spoke to my wife about it and so on. Now, interestingly enough, I wasn't bothered by him so much as could he be right? That's what bothered me. And then when we went to the South as part of our research and so on, I became very conscious of my reactions. For instance, we interviewed some black people in a small town outside of Claxton, Georgia, and it was a very slummy area. And we went to one frame house where a garbage can had been overturned. And it was pretty messy because we stepped into it. And I remember it made me nauseous. But as we walked up the steps, I remembered his question, and I had a flashback to my childhood in Coney Island, where there also had been an overturned garbage can, but it didn't make me nauseous. And I thought, why not? That's, Mrs. Siegel is right. Because the garbage in front of my house, I knew had just been on a table. And what was there to be nauseous about? And also, I was going to say I'm embarrassed, but the honest thing is the word Jewish garbage was in my mind. It really was my family's garbage. You know, it was my sister's. You know, it was what was on a plate that was now in there. So why did I make? And then I wondered, was I really nauseated by the garbage or the source of the garbage? And then this is when the moments of truth hit you, you know, and maybe I had certain prejudices and stereotypes and fears from my childhood, innocently given by my sainted mother, because she had a stereotypes that all Gentiles were drunk. And most of the blacks I met too were also drunk. You know, I didn't. Now I meet blacks who are professors. At that time I didn't, you see. So my life experiences and what I was trying were quite different, you see. So, well, I merely want to alert you that you can't put a halo around your head and think, and that's why I'm criticizing myself first, that because you are good and kind to your children and you vote and you go to the YMHA and you're a member of a synagogue and you contribute to the UJA and you have all these other, you know, positive things, that you're free of prejudices or stereotypes about other people. So. But the first point I want to make is that we are a society of groups. You want to ask? You want to differ?
No, I just have one interesting thing. The group in the city I like most, and the answer was I don't like groups. I like individual people. That's just the opposite of
Good, right. Now, that's one of our problems. How do we maintain our individuality in this group membership, but yet being aware that group membership, let me read to you a couple things. I'm glad you read that, see? Here. An individual's ethnicity, meaning whether he's Jewish or Catholic or an immigrant, that is his group status, is a salient, meaning important, meaningful characteristic, which influences the individual's status, his self-esteem, his position in society, and degree of access to the opportunity structure. Now, I'm a professor, as you know, at a university. I have a class. And one day I said to the students, this very book, I said, buy Beyond the Melting Pot, it's only $1.95, and make it part of your library. And a black student said, I can't afford it. So without thinking much about it, I said to her, skip lunch and buy it. And through clenched teeth, she said to me, I'll have you understand, I'll have to skip 3 lunches. And I was a little taken aback, and I was a little sorry that I spoke so flippantly about it. She came up to me later and she said, you're a white man, you have no idea what it means to be black. Now it so happens I know a little bit more, let's say, than the average person because it's my field of interest, but there's no doubt that she was right, that the average person, white person, finds it next to impossible, a little bit like non-Jews may find it difficult to identify with Jews or with Israel or whatever it may be, you know, with the other persons. And she's very conscious that, for instance, here's a humorous thing. We have a black professor, a woman, who just became sick with, are any of you, you've heard of sickle cell anemia?
Yes.
Well, that's a characteristic of blacks, and usually lower class blacks.
That I didn't know.
Yes.
I thought it was all blacks are
No.
subject to it.
Not necessarily.
On a heredity basis.
Yes.
Right,
Yes.
so that it had nothing to do with
Yes.
the association.
Well, the incidence is higher in lower class blacks.
Okay.
Yes. Well, now, interestingly enough, she had so internalized, made this looking glass self, society's attitudes towards herself, that she was embarrassed as a professor in middle class black at having a low class illness. See, whether it's right or wrong is not important.
It's
That's
important
because
for
she
her
thought so.
embarrassment.
That's right. That is, she internalized society's evaluations about her group. That's what I'm trying to say to you. Like we do. Don't you internalize society's evaluations about your group?
But that instance about the book is poverty, and that's not black or white. A white person could have been just as poor and not afforded the book.
Yes. Except that in American society, ethnicity and poverty correlate. See, that's why many people, if you put down the word black, some people would have said poor, uneducated. Now, the most astounding thing in New York City are the number of blacks who make over $10,000 a year. But the stereotype, and who are college graduates. And I can tell you that at NYU we have thousands now of black college students. But who incidentally, who come from the ghetto and who still feel, although sociologically, in fact, they have moved up, psychologically, they still carry society's attitudes towards them. Inside themselves, that's the tragedy. And so do you. Because as they point out in the melting pot, we have to catch up with our statistics. That is, the percentage of poor blacks is not as great as it used to be. And of those who are educated. And yet we still have the stereotype, as if they were that, you see. So the point I'm getting across now has to do with group membership. Now, group identity, that's another key phrase. Buttresses the individual, supports the individual. In a volatile, atomistic society, it helps provide customary, traditional ways of making decisions. Now, what do we mean by group identity? Buttressing the individual's sense of self and identity and so on. Does this name mean anything to you? Man's first name is Kurt, his second name is Lewin. You ever hear him? Anybody ever hear him? That's tragic. He was a German Jew psychologist. I could have said he was a psychologist. He also was Jewish and he was German. And in the field of group dynamics and group understanding, he was, I think, one of the world's great authorities. He died in 44, 45. His wife edited a book, which if you have time, I'd like you to get. I think it's absolutely great. It's called Resolving Social Conflicts by Kurt Lewin. And so in there he talks about bringing up the Jewish child. It's absolutely brilliant. Resolving Social Conflicts by Kurt Lewin. It's available in a paperback. And incidentally, a book about Lewin just came out by, I'll think of it a second. All right, now, Lewin makes this fundamental point, that it is group membership which determined, in Hitler Germany, group membership and group identification, which was the most important characteristic. You could have said education, wealth, job, occupation. What determines people's reactions to the Hitler tragedy? That is when people started to lose their jobs, and when that whole tragic impact fell upon families, who fell apart and who handled himself well? Which incidentally, we were studying in a seminar in Israel, is a fascinating, complex, and traumatizing kind of questions, He maintains that those who had a strong group membership of almost any kind, like he said in the concentration camps, the socialists, the trade union members, the communists, often maintained themselves strongly because they had comrades to depend upon. They weren't atomistic, by atom, A-T-O-M-I-S-I-T-I-C. They weren't individuals completely divorced from any sense of support. You see? Do you see what I'm getting at? So therefore he says that whether a person is a Catholic or a Jew, or his occupation it could be, he's a doctor, he's a lawyer, where it may be, the phrase he used, which is a very interesting one, gives him the ground on which to stand, that gives him support when conflict or tragedy or difficulties arise, you see? So it's not just an individual characteristic, but it's a group characteristic which determines not only our fate, our status, our self-image, what society thinks of us, but even then how we behave in a difficult kind of situation. You agree? Disagree with that? What is your reaction to that? Does it make sense?
Who was the doctor who does work with the autistic child?
Bettelheim.
Yes, he was in a concentration camp for a number of years. Right. And his theory is, from personal experience, is that those people who had something to do, were planning something, who wanted to accomplish something, when and if they got out, they had the biggest chance of survival. And that's one of
Which is another way instead of saying the same thing, that if a person is more than himself. Incidentally, in a study of suicide, Emil Durkheim, one of the early sociologists, Durkheim, wanted to determine from a group point of view who was more likely to commit suicide or less likely to commit suicide. From group characteristics, not if John Jones is dead, you can't psychoanalyze him because he's dead. But suppose we were to study 1,000 suicides. At first we would see how many are men, how many are women, right? How many are teenagers, how many are over 60. You can get group characteristics, you can count them, you see. How many are married, how many are unmarried. How many are in church, you can find out. There's so much you can find out even though their body is dead. Durkheim did that. You know what he found out? Can you guess? That where people were members of a group, which could be a family or a synagogue, they were less likely to commit suicide under difficulty than if they were isolated. So therefore he found that the Protestant rate of suicide was higher than the Catholic rate because Catholics tended to be more closely allied to the church. He found that married people tended to commit suicide less often, sometimes I wonder, than isolated people. So now I can predict that on the west side of New York City, in the upper 60s and the 70s, where there's a high SRO rate, single room occupancy rate, that the suicide rate will be higher, even though I never met anyone. And it's true. It's true. Especially where there are no telephones, and there's no one to give you a sense of support. Many a man who's thought, let's say in a stock market crash, I'm going to kill myself, he's got 3 little kids, he thinks twice about it. Or he's got a wife. Or there's an uncle or a relative who says, just a minute, or a rabbi. There's some group contact that says, hold up. And so if there's, not only has to live up to that person, but that person gives him a sense of support in what he is doing, you see. So you see how group membership is now so terribly important in 1,001 ways. I can't resist telling you, since you mentioned Bettelheim, you've heard of Mitch Ginsburg, who was Commissioner of Welfare? Well, he's a social worker too. And he and I and Dr. Abant were in school roughly about the same time. In any case, some years ago, Dr. Bettelheim debated a professor at NYU whose name is Chine, C-H-E-I-N. Originally it was Chaim. And there was an interesting debate. It was on bringing up the Jewish child. And it relates to our topic. Chine took the attitude that the most important thing was group membership and the strength of community institutions as to how people behaved under stress, like under Hitler. In other words, if you had a strong synagogue, you had a strong Y, you had strong family societies, whatever it may be, in a strong community, people behaved better. Bettelheim took what might be a psychoanalytic approach, that the most important thing was the parent-child relationship, which determined how people behaved under stress. Now, each is a defensible argument. And each spoke for, this was before a crowd of 2,000 Jewish social workers. And in the debate, now I should tell you that Bettelheim is Jewish, but is a Prussian Jew, German Jew. And he doesn't understand Yiddish, which is another problem. And in his remarks, Chine, speaking to a Jewish group, used a Yiddish phrase which was, "Auf Ganef brennt der Hitler." Everybody understand that?
No, I'm a Russian Jew too.
Ganef, the key word. You a German Jew too?
Half, I'm half,
Half?
but I never heard it at home.
You never?
I've been up in
What is the meaning of the word Ganef?
Thief.
Very good. You
Yeah,
all
but
get
what's
it.
the rest of it? That I got.
All right. The key word is Ganef,
Yeah.
which means a thief.
Thief.
Often Ganef means on the thief. Brent means burn. Hitler's hat, which is an idiomatic way of saying the shoe pinches. When you catch somebody in an argument, and so on. Meaning he was sensitive to this point. So Bettelheim, because Bettelheim had just told the story, so Bettelheim became furious and thought that he was calling him a thief, not that he was using an idiomatic expression. So Bettelheim rushed to the microphone in his German accent. He said, "In all my 40 years of professional experience, nobody has called me a thief. How dare you, Dr. Chine?" And suddenly they're both PhDs, doctor. So Chine said, "Oh, I didn't mean to call you a thief. Not only, I was using an idiomatic expression." He explained it. But the more explained, the more in difficulty he got. And Bettelheim was beside himself with rage, because he's a man without a sense of humor. He takes himself seriously and so on. And then in their interchange, Bettelheim utters a delicious, Chine, Freudian slip. Chine, who's besides himself that he's misunderstood and embarrassed by it all, he keeps calling him Dr. Bettelheim this, Dr. Bettelheim this, and he's using that doctor over and over again, out of deference and respect. He finally says, I want to apologize to you, Dr. Gonoff. All right. Okay, now, so we're talking now about ethnic groups and their importance. We now have to say that ethnic groups have both positive and negative values. On the positive side, they keep cultural traditions alive. They provide preferred associates. I interviewed many blacks and said, where would you like to live? They said in Harlem. Not that it's dirty and poor, but they like to be among their own. And if you look the way Jews live, they cluster among themselves. Not that anybody pushed them there, they want to be there, among people whom they like. So we use the term preferred associates. It helps organize the social structure, these ethnic groups. It offers opportunity for mobility and success and friendship. And it enables people to identify themselves in the face of the threatening chaos of a large and impersonal society. See, as we in the second session will get into this, one of the problems of American society is that most of us coming from a European background, our parents or grandparents having come from a background where they lived lives where on a day-to-day basis most people knew each other. In other words, if they went into the street, if my grandmother, wherever she was and I never met her, and she came from Minsk, if she walked into the street in a Jewish neighborhood, she took for granted she knew everybody. In fact, the interesting thing that most immigrant groups rarely met a stranger. Just think of that. Whereas you and I meet strangers every day. And therefore we develop mechanisms to protect ourselves from that. You want one mechanism of protection? We become blasé. That's what's called a coping technique. That is, if you read the New York Times every morning, your husband, or you do, and you read 3 children burned in a fire, cop killed by addict commits suicide. If you were to react to each one of those as if they were your close neighbors and friends or members of your immediate family or congregation, you'd be emotionally worn out before the day started, because our society is so huge. So to protect yourself, you do not react the way a human being reacts. Think of that for a second. Whereas your grandparent, automatically, if anybody died, my God, they go running to the family because they knew him in a small village, you see. You took for granted you knew them, you see. Well, now you come from that kind of society where the usual interaction is that of strangers. Now you can't live with strangers. You have to have support. You want to borrow money. You need someone has to help you with a job or whatever it may be. Well, then, one of the interesting things about American society is that we tend to lean not so much on our occupational structure, like lawyers to lawyers, or doctors to doctors, or teachers to teachers, not so much on our neighborhood structure, which is what our grandparents did. That is, I'm sure you live in an apartment house where the people on the next floor are strangers to you, though they've been there for 20 years, right? That's a strange thing. Our grandparents would say, usually you'd know each other, but you don't. So then whom do you lean upon? Whom do most people lean upon? Fellow ethnics. Is that right? Fellow Jews, fellow Catholics, fellow Hungarians, fellow Swedes, fellow Italians. We almost create a little lifestyle that's reminiscent of the lifestyle of our grandparents. Isn't that interesting? Like, not a ghetto, but a little thing that looks like a ghetto. A cluster of people of a like-minded nature huddling together for relationships which an urban society destroys.
Well, it would seem to me that it's correct exactly what you say, but if you take, if you were going to have a national election, that quite a few of the people who would vote would not be part of an urban society, and therefore what happens could not necessarily be as a result of the urban society.
I don't think I got that. Say that in a different way.
What I mean to say is you are talking about all of us as citizens of the United States and people of groups, but we're not typical of the United States as a whole, those who live in an urban society.
We're typical of the metropolitan areas.
And so that's what you really are talking about.
Yes, but we're talking about, because the trend in the United States is, the latest census indicates that, Did you read that story about North Dakota and South Dakota? There are areas there where you don't see a human being in hundreds of miles. Where are those people? They're in Chicago, Los Angeles, California, and New York. In other words, we're becoming increasingly an urbanized society. You know, you read the statistic, time of the American Revolution, 80% of the people lived on farms in small towns. You know, and increasingly, now the urban experience is becoming the common experience.
I think outside of New York, especially in the South and Midwest and Southwest, that ethnic identification is even more important because life centers so much around the synagogue or the church, and there's practically no interaction between Protestant, Catholic, and Jew.
Yes.
I would say in New York, at least, I
You have
many
more.
friends in all walks, but perhaps in a small town, even in Texas, a Protestant wouldn't be interested in talking to me.
That's why I asked the question.
Unless I
Yes.
were in an intellectual circle and within a university atmosphere. Otherwise, they don't seem to mix at all. They don't even know each other.
Is that your experience?
But that's
That's
corroboration,
your bearing
that's
now.
corroboration of what you
Yes.
said, that
Yes.
the group membership is even tighter in a small community.
Yes. Have you ever lived in a small community? You speak with some feeling.
I have lived in a small community, but I've also traveled with my husband who does a lot of work outside of New York, and he's always pointing this out to me, telling me that New York is not typical of the United
That's right,
States.
yes,
And,
yeah.
he
But
says this, and when I've
that's right.
traveled with him, I've noticed it, but I think that, however, people do get much more support from these ethnic groups outside of New York because they
Yes.
are much closer.
That's
The
right.
People in the urban areas are much more alienated and isolated from any group at all.
Yes, we have very many Jews. You see, yes.
Can I just say something? I am remarried now. I was married all my life to a Jew and he died, and I just remarried an Italian. Now, he's an American Italian, third generation, and I didn't really give it that much thought. My children have grown up, they're Jewish, and this is it.
Yes.
But wherever I go, I get the strangest. The Jews ask me if I'm a Sephardic,
Yeah. What's your last name now?
Pagano.
Yes.
Before it was
Yes.
Leighton, but everybody knew I was Jewish. That
Yes.
was not a Jewish name.
Yes.
Now, the Italians, they are exactly as clannish as the Jews. So they
Yes.
come over and they say, one woman said to me, "No wonder you're so pleasant, you're one of us."
Yes.
And it's
Yes.
in a store.
Yes.
And as she was an Italian sales lady, it was
Yes.
like, oh, I'm kind of,
Yes.
and I look and I feel like telling them, well, look, I'm not Italian, I'm Jewish.
Yes.
And I never was so conscious of being Jewish in my whole life. I never thought
Naturally.
that
Yes.
this would happen to me.
In a same, that is a sharper illustration than that there, because now you're in an area. See, if you travel abroad, suddenly you now identification, I'm an American. You never say that here because everybody's an American. Isn't that right? So now that you're in a non-Jewish atmosphere, now incidentally, these clannish characteristics, which we think are Jewish because we learned about a certain characteristic from our mothers, who by coincidence happen to be Jews. You see, I always thought that to be friendly was to be Jewish. It's a naive, childish, right? Because everybody I met who was friendly was a Jew. So, certainly I kept that till I was in high school. When I met some friend, it's a silly thing, isn't it, you see? Now, Dr. Johnson, who's a black, whose father was the president of FISC, who worked with me in a project, we exchanged experiences, and I'll bring in an article that I wrote on this, on the Negro and the Jew, and since you mentioned that, we'll talk about that next time. He thought that humor was black. That's interesting, not in that other meaning of the term. That is, if he went to a party and black people were there, he assumed it would be gay and funny and relaxed and so on. If there were whites, they're hung up tight and inhibited from where he is. Incidentally, the Irish think that too. Get a group of Irish together, it's great. They're warm. The Italians think that about the Italians, and the Jews think that about the Jews. Because they're all so clannish, they don't see the same characteristics in other people. And it's not till you marry him that you suddenly, naively, you say, he's just like me.
But you discover things in yourself, too, in a situation
Yes.
like this, like when the Italians say the Italians and Jews are alike. I say, oh, no, the Jews are much more interested in education and culture and background. And we
Is that
go
what you
out
say?
for all one to
What
myself.
happens?
I don't right away, I'm sitting there.
Yes.
Do you think that this group identification helps to create a more cohesive or a more divisive society?
Yes, you're going to tell us the advantages, now tell us the
Yes. Well, that's a very good question. On the minus side, ethnic groups can reinforce exclusiveness, separativeness. We do have that. even suspicion and distrust, and serves sometime as what sociologists would call a foci, a rallying point for conflict. That's true. Now, whether we like ethnicity or not, it does matter very much. It's a concrete reality with which we must cope, and condemning it or praising it is a waste of time. What we have to do is understand it. Ethnicity does make for exclusiveness, and does sometimes make, and I imagine especially middle-class Jews worry that it may diminish our humanity because of our lack of access to other kinds of people. And I suppose that's true. Would you?
I feel that way, yes.
That's all right. I too.
It would be better if
If-
people would mix with each other and not be so exclusive in their own.
Those are not irreconcilable opposites. That is, it's the phrase has been used that we're a society of cultural pluralism. Some people use that term, where the image is made of an orchestra. There are violins and there are tubas and saxophones, and you don't say one is better than the other. You need them all in order to make one society. So in an ideal society, it ought to be possible to be a Catholic or a Jew or a Hungarian or a Slav or wherever it may be, and at the same time human, and be able to relate to other people. That is, it's an illusion to think that we're all going to become, that's why this course was called Melting Pot. See, originally when our parents came, most educators thought, as soon as we clean up these immigrants, in other words, we take the beard off the old men and get rid of their accents and put them into school and so on. In other words, that's the word acculturation, where they begin to read the New York Times, they get an education and so on. Everybody will be like everybody else. That turned out to be an illusion.
I'm from Connecticut, Fairfield. This is my daughter. I'm visiting today. I want you to know that we, in our area, there are very few Jews. And we do social work. I'm doing some volunteer work at the circuit courts. We mix very well, but socially, we are all at our own private clubs, country clubs. We play golf together. We hardly get together after daytime business.
And how do you feel about
hours.
it? Do you share your daughter's
I'm happy
concern?
with it. I
You
like
are?
my group. And
Are you reconciled to it or happy to it with it?
I'm reconciled to it, and I rather enjoy it. I don't have to be on my guard at all. I can say whatever I like, and I know that they understand me. And while I'm maybe within walking distance of a country club wants no part of me, I don't resent them at all. I'm tickled pink that we have ours.
Okay, now that's a very, I'm glad you said that. That's a very typical reaction. And a key phrase you used is being on guard.
Yeah.
You see,
But now we.
well, no, the point is we are. Among strangers, what's that?
She has hostilities also.
What's that?
Her hostilities are there too, which she doesn't
Do you
want
think
to
you're hostile?
display. No, but she might have within her own group.
Probably do like everybody else, but I am delighted that I have my own club, my own golfing group, and my own art group, and during the day though.
The
when I
question
go-
comes up when you do have to cooperate with those people, like in a PTA.
We're very friendly, we do.
Or a hospital, you
very
do?
well. Yes, absolutely no
But why do you
discrimination.
have to be on guard?
And I
then?
grew up as a child in this society, and that's very true. Socially, I never went out with
None.
who wasn't Jewish, but all of my friends all day, in athletics and everything, were all, I had no
Non-Jew.
Jewish friends at all. But in New York now, socially, my generation, there's a tremendous number of mixed marriages.
Right.
Where, with a lot of assimilation, where many, even Jewish couples our age, do not associate themselves at all with being Jews. They're just people, and their friends are all kinds of people. I think that there's much more assimilation in our generation, perhaps in New York, than maybe in the
Your
South.
generation? There's a great deal of intermarriage, yes.
So don't you think that there's a movement today, I mean, with the young people, to do away with this differentiating of this,
Group
of the
membership?
special, yes, that they are
Trying to.
that they're really
Well,
making an effort to just realize.
An extreme example, if read this morning's Times on the op-ed page, opposite the editorial page, this article by Mr. Rubenstein, where he talks about Jewish youth who visited the Algerian Al-Fatah in sympathy. It's a small handful, but they consider themselves emancipated Jews and concerned with difficulty of anybody. So that's an example of that, but it's still, terribly small. Are there any other comments about that?
In Germany, didn't they have a lot of trouble because the people were assimilated, and wasn't that part of the breakup, and why all these things are being written by a contained society?
Well, the Jews didn't go to concentration camps because they were assimilated,
No, but they didn't get afraid enough because they weren't one group. They didn't work together. They all went to Israel and made a country.
Yes.
Well,
The Jews
let
in Germany
them assimilate
consider
whether they
themselves
want to or
Germans.
that's not, I'm kind of
No,
assimilated.
they assimilated it.
Here, this remark, the Jews of Germany consider themselves Germans rather than Jews? Like Mr. Bettelheim? Yes.
I think now of my shock as an American Jew when I visited Israel and discovered that my Jewishness was not the only group identification that I had, and I've read about the shock of American blacks who go to Africa and who discover.
What was your other identification? As an American?
I assume so.
Yes. Yes. All right, well, then I think what we've arrived at is that we've got a complex problem to talk about. Now, is there somebody who knows the American Jewish Committee and who can get there, has the time? Yes. Yes. Because they have a pamphlet, it's $1, and I'd like you to read it. This is it. Can you get us, how many are in the group? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. There are 18 people in the group. Would I be imposing on you if I asked you all to buy it for $1? And would you bring us 8? What's that?
Skip lunch?
Touche. Incidentally, it's on group ethnicity. It's written by a Catholic priest, though published by the American Jewish Committee. And if you'll bring us 18 copies, we'll sell them next time. Now, let's take a choice of topic. We'll do this since this is a seminar democratically. I would gather from the inventory we took that you're concerned about black-Jewish relationships as one of the groups that we'd want to study. Is that right? Because 8 of you indicated that's an area that's different from myself.
Why should we be so, I couldn't care less, really. I know they don't like us much, but I really don't care. Why is it so important? I
Well,
don't
that's
understand
the-
why that's important.
It's very
They
important.
interfere with your way of life, that's why.
They always, they'll interfere with any
Well, I
white
tell you,
person. I think just because we're white is enough. I mean, this is.
Yeah,
No, I tell
agree
you.
with that.
What's that? You agree?
Black-white relationship.
Yeah, rather than the
I think it should
Jewish,
be.
All right. Black-white relationships?
Right.
All right. So let's talk about black-white relationships, but I will try to squeeze in here and there the black-Jewish relationship. But we'll discuss it in the broader context.
Why does the white Jew
What?
take the brunt of
For
it?
7 years, and I think black-Jewish relationships is extremely important, especially since the justice margins.
Right. All right. So then,
But another, I want to
Yes.
make one, as I live in the country, I'm bored
you're going to be here
to
next
death
week?
with it.
We'll miss you.
I'm gonna try, I'll
All
try.
right.
I come in
I think
most
this
of the time
is
to see
great.
the babies. But I'm bored to death with the whole thing. I've read so much about it, I've heard so much about it, I am just sick to death.
Well, we'll try to give it a fresh approach. All right? Now, look, the reason we're picking the black-Jewish problem, the black-white problem in New York is very simply is that in terms of group relationships, the school system, that's the reason I gave you these associations. Some people, if you would put down teachers' union, some people in New York City would then say the association is Jewish, because it is. And if others would say, what's your association with community control, they put the word black. Now, these are the issues which are now bothering New York City. The mayor is very much concerned about it and so on. And you really can't understand interpersonal reactions, just as I, as a professor, can't understand a black student and why she said, I'll have to skip 3 lunches, till I have some sensitivity of what it means to be black. Now, it took me quite a bit of time to tell her that I went to school in a depression and that I went to City College with a dime in my pocket, and she couldn't believe me. She couldn't imagine it because she just assumed, dressed as I am now, that I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth. And I can't talk about the immigration of white people, of Jews, and the poverty and so on that we knew as children. And it took weeks till she could get that into her mind. And now she's a better person for it. But she said, I grew up like I associated blacks with being drunk and so on. She associated Jews with exploiters because every Jew she met was a storekeeper or the man who came around to collect the rent. She didn't meet any other kind of Jew. So she suffers from the same narrow background that I suffered from. And it's until we each got out of our cocoon that we then began to see the humanity of the rest of the world, you see. And then, inside the end of that punchline with the Jewish eyes, just to take a minute on that, I worried about that for 2 years because I was afraid he was right. And I thought, my God, I can't be a professor or teacher, do anything if I restrict humanity to being Jewish. And I must admit it took an effort of will and of mind and of thought and long deliberation and painful. I want to tell you, can't tell you how painful it was. And the unearthing of these stereotypes was like going through a process of psychoanalysis, that I did carry negative things within me that I got from my mother, of all places, whom I loved and adored and so on, you see. And then when I found that the black had the same problem, instead, his father was a college professor. My father was a storekeeper. And he was black and I was white. That was a shift of it. Well, we then began to realize our common humanity across our ethnicity. But as I understood him better as a black growing up, and as he understood me better as a Jew growing up, we each understood ourselves better for it, you see, because we saw the common humanity in each of us, but which came clothed in a glove which had an ethnicity marked on it. But the content in the glove was humanity. So that's what we will talk about. All right, so you'll get us those booklets. Will you appreciate?
So you include the Puerto Ricans with the blacks, or are they
Oh, yeah.
a race of
Well, no. I'll focus on the blacks, but the Puerto Ricans in New York City are an extremely important group.
So it's white against.
Well, it's white, black, not against. Well, white,
White,
right.
But the Puerto Ricans.
The black-white conflict in New York, and then we'll give the variations. You see, take the poor Puerto Rican. Is he black or white?
He doesn't want to be known as.
So you see, we've got all kinds of complexities. All right, we've reached a bewitching hour of 12:15, and we are adjourned. What do I have to do?
Very good. Very good.
Come next week.
Oh, yeah, I went through. All right. I'll see you all next week. Oh, then let me have these. I will.
Can I take one and give it to my husband?
Yes.
Louise, how are you?
Yeah, try it on there.
Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.